Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to the second session of the Women's Major Group New Monthly Meeting Series, Another World is Possible, Feminist Answers to Big Questions. We're so grateful that you're all here with us for this important discussion. I know the time zone, the timing with the time zones is always difficult, but I'm glad that so many of you could be with us today. So before we start saying anything else, we want to announce that we have interpretation available from English to Spanish to French. So please select the language you'd like to listen to the meeting in using the globe sign at the bottom right of your screens. You should also select English if you'd like to listen in English. We have speakers that will speak in Spanish. So if you want to listen in English, be sure to click English so everyone can be situated in their right interpretation channel. I'll pass it to our Spanish interpreters to say this in Spanish.
Gracias, Andrea. Buenas tardes. Para las personas que quisieran hoy escuchar en español, si están conectando desde un computador, les pedimos que por favor hagan clic abajo a mano derecha en el globo que dice interpretación, y ahí eligen español. También si están conectando desde un teléfono, por favor toquen los tres punticos abajo a mano derecha que dicen más, eligen interpretación de idiomas y ahí eligen el español. Y arriba a mano derecha tocan finalizar. Vamos a poner estas instrucciones en el chat también. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, María Angélica, and I'll pass it to our French interpreters to make the interpretation announcement in French.
Bonjour, nous voulons juste vous faire savoir qu'on a une interprétation. Si vous utilisez votre ordinateur, vous allez voir au bas de votre écran le globe qui reste. Vous pouvez choisir la langue française. Si vous utilisez une tablette ou un téléphone portable, vous pouvez voir à droite, au bas de votre écran, 3 petits points là où vous choisissez interprétation de la langue. Et vous pouvez choisir le français. En haut, à droite de votre écran, vous allez voir terminer. Donc, il faut taper sur terminer pour que vous puissiez entrer dans la salle du canal français. Et nous allons mettre aussi tout ça dans le chat. Merci, bonne participation.
Thank you so much, Rose, and thank you to our amazing language justice interpretation team. So just welcome again, everyone, for those who just joined us. This is the second section of our new monthly meeting series as the Women's Major Group for members. It's titled Another World is Possible because it's us giving the feminist answers to big questions. So we'll be joined by a bunch of members, and we're really glad that you're all here for this important discussion. We started with some logistics notes, which I'll keep doing, then I'll pass to our moderator. And then most of the session today will focus on the feminist proposals and structural solutions coming from our members. And then the last 30 minutes or so, we hope to have an open discussion with all of the participants and members here today. So before we begin, we wanted to also take a moment to recognize all of the feminists, all of the activists who could not be here today, and also especially to honor the environmental and human rights defenders who've lost their lives in the struggle to sustain life, their lands, water, and resources, and with all the feminists resisting all forms of oppression as we speak throughout the world. We know these calls are not accessible to everyone. We appreciate everyone who's here taking the time of their day, some of you very late. So that's always really, really appreciated, but also recognizing that not everyone who should be here is here, of course. And then also with the topic of today, we thought it would be important to especially highlight the struggle of environmental women defenders. So we also want to take a moment to announce that this is a safe space. Shanaz and myself will be the accessibility and safety coordinators in this call. So you can always write to us directly in the chats if you have any accessibility, safety, or connection concerns. We're happy to troubleshoot anything with you. I'd also like to note that this meeting is only open to women's major group members as participants. So it'll be a small and cozy space, but we'll record the first hour of the meeting. So the part where the speakers will share their experiences, and we'll put it on our YouTube and social media channels as a resource. The open discussion at the end will not be recorded. So again, to keep it sort of as a safe space, as a conversation among members. And we also eventually do hope to have an article or an op-ed as an output of this series. So in addition to all the recordings, we hope to have a little write-up of all the proposals that have been shared across all of these meetings, which will go on till December. And if you'd like to contribute to this article, of course, you can reach out to us as the Women's Major Group Secretariat, Shanaz, myself, and Maitri with anything you may need, or if you want to contribute. And then, of course, as it says on the screen, discriminatory remarks, hate speech, the denial of self-proclaimed identities, any anti-rights discourse or discrimination, especially against folks speaking in these meetings, will not be tolerated. So if such an incident occurs, the person will be removed from the Zoom platform after one warning. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor to our Francophone Africa organizing partner, RECFACOP's Cécile Javet, to moderate our meeting today. And I'd also like to give a quick moment of congratulations again to Cécile, who was awarded the 2022 Wangari Maathai Forest Champions Award earlier this year. So that's also why it's super timely that she's moderating today's important discussion. So thank you, Cécile, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you, ladies, for joining this evening. Great event. We hope we're going to have 1.5 hours interactions, share of ideas and thoughts, so that we have straight and concrete messages we have to forward to all those who want them to understand that women, feminists, are having great questions and we need great responses. So thank you very much. We have a great panel of speakers. We'll have Juana Vera Delgado, we have Zukiswa White, we have Griselda, Alvarado, Picado, and after that we'll going to have an open discussion, and we hope to have some time for that. We have spared not less than 30 minutes for the discussion, for the open discussions. So now we're going to start. We're going to start with the first speakers, Juana Vera Delgado from Global Forest Coalition, who will be presenting in Spanish. So please make sure that you have your interpretation already on. And the question to Juana is, what are the Global Forest Coalition key systemic proposals in the struggle for ecological and environmental justice? And what are the real feminist and decolonial solutions, alternatives to false solutions like net zero, nature-based solution, or growing engineering? Juana, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. I will speak in English for facilitating this discussion.
Thank you.
So for answering your question, I prepared in a presentation, but first I will share with you a video that also answer directly your question. So the first 6 minutes I will present the video, and then after I will complement some ideas. So please, could you just play the video?
As shown by the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports on climate change adaptation and mitigation, the world is at a crossroads. We are already seeing the devastating impacts of a 1.1 degrees Celsius temperature rise. We are over 420 parts per million of CO2, and we need rapid transformations across all systems to avoid the worst climate impacts. To limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, global greenhouse gas emissions must peak before 2025 and be reduced by 43% by 2030. But current climate pledges and promises made by governments and corporations will not take us to where we need to be. We don't have time for false solutions such as carbon markets and offsets, net zero pledges, large-scale monoculture tree plantations, bioenergy, techno-fixes, and smart agriculture systems. The most vulnerable groups like indigenous peoples, women, and frontline communities continue to feel the increasingly devastating effects of climate change. We must urgently address the intertwined crises of climate change, deforestation, and biodiversity loss. Luckily, the solutions are out there. Many grassroots groups are already implementing gender-just and transformative real climate solutions. They are fighting to secure collective rights to forests, land, and water for indigenous peoples, local communities, and women.
La rentabilisation du mode de vie des peuples autochtones et en particulier les femmes en territoire de Walikale. Nous sommes en train de mener une expérience de développement socio-économique en lien avec l'élaboration de plans simples de gestion dans la concession forestière à Makassa. Les femmes autochtones sont réunies, sont mises en groupe qui développent différentes activités, notamment les activités d'élevage, de stabilisation des caprins, l'élevage des poules, mais aussi on développe des activités agricoles en lien avec l'alimentation familiale et non extensive. Et dans ce genre d'activités, on met en exergue les savoirs traditionnels et endogènes de ces femmes.
Women are taking the lead to conserve and protect the biodiversity and ecosystem functions that the communities need to sustain themselves.
Au Bénin, en particulier dans la commune de Basila, les femmes rurales pratiquent l'apiculture par des méthodes durables. C'est-à-dire, contrairement à ceux qui font l'usage du feu de brousse pour la récolte du miel, elles utilisent du matériel adéquat, notamment l'accoutrement. En plus de cela, ce qui est plus intéressant encore chez ces femmes est qu'elles procèdent au reboisement de leurs forêts ruchées par des espèces de plantes mellifères.
Na defesa de seus territórios, da floresta e da biodiversidade, as mulheres se destacam. Elas são as principais guardiões das sementes crioulas, elas resguardam toda uma biodiversidade, plantas medicinais em seus quintais, raças crioulas também de pequenos animais. Então elas têm um papel fundamental na conservação ambiental e também no combate às mudanças climáticas.
Indigenous peoples, local communities, and women are practicing transformative agriculture, like agroecology, one of the most equitable and just ways of addressing our climate crisis.
हमान इसलिए हमन जंगल मांग करे हैं तो हमन जंगल ले हम लाथन बम्बू एहा इमली दाना है एला आसो फिर लगा एला आसो उपयोग कर होए और छिटा के दाना है आसो एहुला भी plantation में एहुला लगा हुआ.
Nosotros como mujeres somos las que nos quedamos en nuestros comunidades a
We as
cuidarlas.
women are the ones who stay in our communities taking care of our forest. We are taking care of our families and supporting the environment in our project that we're doing, that they have been burned. So in that way, we take care of the environment.
Movements are increasingly mobilizing to fight for their rights and to preserve ecosystems and natural resources.
कुटी कानुनका कुरा होस्, अभ्यासका कुरा होस्, टेक्निकल कुरा होस्, सम्बन्धित सबै कुरा चाहिँ दिदीबहिनीहरूलाई पालैसँग जानकारी गराउने, उनीहरूको क्षमता वृद्धि बढाउने, नेतृत्व विकास गर्ने क्रममा सामुदायिक पोख्ता मासु चाहिँ रेगुलर रूपमा लागि नै रह्यो।
There cannot be real climate action without gender, climate, and social justice. And it's not as hard as it sounds. We can do this if we focus on the real solutions that already exist.
So I think that the main message of this video is that we need to address intersecting structural inequalities and injustice that is happening at different levels, especially at the community and indigenous people territories. By intersecting identities or injustice, I mean gender, environmental, economic, social, and historical, cultural injustices. As we could see in the video, the global development narratives, including narratives in the high-level panel forums, such as the COPs, in the name of sustainability and justice, continue to be dominated by powerful countries and corporations who have co-opted the agenda of domestic policies and dictate the governance of the use or extraction of natural resources and labor of the majority world. I mean the southern countries when I speak about the majority world. So for instance, in the minority world, this is the rich countries, what we know as northern countries, have successfully translated their climate responsibilities to the majority world, using UN spaces as the climate COPs, CBD COPs, and food of water COPs. They do this by presenting the techno-physics solutions, what we call the GFC called whole solutions, as a blueprint solutions to the climate crisis. So as we saw in the video, zero, net zero, schemes, forest carbon, green engineering, monoculture tree plantations, nature-based solutions, green hydrogen, etc., are basically false solutions. There are like wolves in sheep's clothes because they actually respond to the corporation's interests and not to the most affected people and groups such as women, children, and elders. So this means that climate, biodiversity, and forest-related policies, which are born of actual predominant discourses and solutions, will continue perpetuating the root cause of the crisis they are supposed to tackle, maintaining the colonial, patriarchal, and extractivist and unjust system. Then we know that the current neoliberal model and the false solutions trample and violate people's rights, especially of women, and just they are looking for their profits. So these solutions, because are deeply rooted in patriarchy, disproportionately relies on women's and also children and elders, unpaid labor around the care they do to keep Mother Nature functionality, what scientists call ecosystem functionality. Also, they take care on the local food production for subsistence and also of the domestic care work. So all this care work is the basis for this profit making of these false solutions. So as a result of this, women have to confront multiple forms of gender injustices and right violations. One important is that is felt disproportionately by women is where policies threaten and undermine the secure land tenure and water rights and access to forest territories, given that women shoulder the greatest responsibility for providing food, water, and energy for families, but often have to the least say in how the land must be used. So this lack of secure tenural rights and recognition of indigenous forest territories continue to be a major obstacle to gender justice, including environmental and climate justice in general. Thus, in part, this is because the rights of women and other diverse groups to participate in collective decision-making in their communities and other natural resource governance structures are denied, as they are not the official land or water right holders. So this exclusion happens at both levels, and then government-driven project and within local communities. So where the unique role and contribution of women to traditional knowledge and practices is unrecognized or is undermined. So patriarchy and extractivism generate a vicious circle of intersecting injustices, which feed and generate a growing unfair system. For instance, lack of secure collective land and water rights in turn affect biodiversity and forest conservation, sustainable food production, and empowerment of women and diverse groups. So in the end, patriarchy and corporations do not realize that they are also victims of the unjust system they generate. So therefore, we believe that one of the real feminist and decolonial solutions to the intertwined crisis of climate change, deforestation, and biodiversity loss are gender just, right-based approach and solutions, and in particular recognize and ensure the rights to a territory of indigenous peoples, land tenure and property rights for women and their diversity. So we should not wait for real solutions to the climate crisis and social gender injustices will come from the COPs, because experiences are demonstrating that these meetings are at the service of corporation interests. We also need to leave our offices and desks and turn our eyes to the local practices where actually real solutions are taking place. And we should strengthen the advocacy capacity of local women, men, and youth. We need to bring their voices to alternative collective spaces where they can express themselves. We also need to find ways that the climate and diversity finance reach our communities and women and youth groups, because this is the issue of equity and justice. What is happening actually is that this finance evaporates at a lip service level. So, and that 3.1 trillion US and invested annually in biodiversity destruction rather than biodiversity conservation. And one last concrete proposal, but not less important, is to work with communities on the issue of ecocide law from the feminist perspective, to push that government laws can adopt and implement this law. This can make a huge difference for decreasing different inequalities and injustice within the territories, including our body territories. And thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think, yeah, we understand that we can no more accept false solutions. We need to address the women tenure rights and indigenous tenure right to natural resources in general. We have to promote what you propose, gender just right-based approach that will guarantee equity and justice. Thank you very much for these key issues, key lesson, and key lesson we keep from your intervention, Juana. Thank you.
Thanks.
And
if you have
yes,
some questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe we can stop sharing the screen now and move to the next speakers. Is it Andrea who will help us to? Yes, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. So now we're going to continue with Zukiswa White, Women and Gender Constituency. She will present in English. And the question to you, Zukiswa, is, can you give us a brief overview of the African Feminist Task Force demand ahead of COP27? But mostly, we are hoping to hear what is the Women and Gender Constituency's proposal or vision of what feminist climate justice means, and what does real climate action look like? You have the floor, Zukiswa. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you, Cecile, and to you, Juana, for such a brilliant overview. I'm going to try and hopefully succeed at sharing my screen. And of course, thank you to our interpreters who are facilitating language justice for us. We really appreciate that. So I know I have 15 minutes, so I'm going to try and shorten the submissions.
Okay.
Yeah, so can you all see my screen?
Yes, very well.
Fantastic. So just a little bit about the African Feminist Task Force. So in January this year, a small group of African feminists who are advocates, most of them with the Women and Gender Constituency, started the African Feminist Task Force for COP27. And this task force aim remains to mobilize African feminists ahead of the COP and ensure that, our voices and demands, as well as aspirations and visions for climate justice in particular, are centered in COP27 processes and outcomes. So in April, a call was made to expand representation, and we are very proud that to date, more than 150 feminists, as well as the organizations they work with and represent, are part of the task force. And the membership is open to anyone identifying as a feminist from Africa. So if anyone is interested, please let me know. And of course, the African Feminist Task Force is supported by the Women and Gender Constituency, which is a membership base of 34 organizations. And we do have, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from the flu. UNFCCC status, observer status. So I'll go right into the overview of my presentation, right? So this year's COP happens on the backdrop, of course, of increasingly loud warning signs from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and other bodies about the really devastating effects of human activity on the climate and its disproportionate impact on Africa. In light of increased global urgency around climate change, COP27 is set to prioritize mitigation, adaptation, climate financing, and partnerships and collaboration as its core focus. So it is in this context in particular that we, as members of the African Feminist Task Force, in collaboration with the WGC, as well as solidarity with the broader majority world constituencies, have put together this concrete set of demands. Right? And these demands focus on women's and youth leadership in climate processes. They focus on a just and equitable energy transition, climate finance, technology, and the intersection between climate, social, and economic justice as core tenets of gender justice overall. And so while Africa remains the world's least industrialized continent, only contributing 3.8% to global greenhouse gas emissions, we find ourselves subject to a wide variety of the outsized impacts of human-induced climate change. And so in the context of increasing temperature rises, coastal degradation, rising sea levels, and extreme weather events that are already a reality for us, just like many other frontline communities in the majority worlds. So in this year alone on the continent, we have witnessed and experienced massive floods in Nigeria, in Chad, in South Sudan, Uganda, Ghana, and even my home country, South Africa. These climate disasters have displaced and continue to displace millions of people. In the Horn of Africa, a multi-year drought is wreaking havoc on the region, with 15 million young people now out of school as a result. In North America, for example, we have witnessed incredible heat waves in June, which have caused significant damage to crop harvests and Tunisia. Context continued. Of course, we feel that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and the science and evidence attest to that as well. There's forecasts of temperature rises for most of Africa that will surpass 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. So while the damaging effects of climate change affect everyone, it is clear that the African continent in general and African women and girls in particular are presently most vulnerable to these impacts. So for us, as African ecofeminists, this necessitates a far more aggressive approach to combating climate change that centers the needs of those who continue to be most vulnerable, owing to the intersection of environmental racism, of capitalism, insidious logic of extractivism, as well as patriarchy. African women and girls must, in uncomplicated terms, and this is what we are advocating and insisting on, be amongst those who are centered in the leadership as well as decision-making processes related to setting this continent and the world more broadly on a different path to safeguard the future of humanity. Now, that is the context in brief, right? And so this is why this work is so important for us as a WGC, as well as the African Feminist Task Force. So in a snapshot, our demands are across 6 core themes, right, which is our vision for feminist climate justice. And these are around representation, leadership, and participation, right, that is meaningful and not just a tick boxing exercise, right? So what does it mean for our experiences, our perspectives, our vision for climate and environmental justice look like when we are centered not only as in a participation, but as well as in our leadership. So we are calling for inclusion of women and young people in the national and UNFCCC decision-making processes. We are calling for a just and equitable transition from fossil fuels. We are calling for climate finance, which provides adequate, accessible, affordable, flexible, and human rights-centered finance, increased transparency, and of course, accountability for all pledges made and public funds delivered by developed countries. And our argument, by the way, is that most of the majority world, including, Africa, has, through the process of violent colonization, continued to fund the development of the so-called global north, while we remain in continuous vicious cycles of poverty, and the climate crisis just compounds that. So the call for instance, non-conditional climate finance is not an act of charity, we feel, but really speaking to equity, and then calls for reparations, not only, by the way, for the fact that we are in this crisis because of, the developed world, but also because the ongoing plunder of the continent has continued, to facilitate the development of the North, while we remain in abject poverty that is very man-made, right? The same way sort of capitalism is a man-made scenario which has facilitated poverty worldwide. So the climate crisis, as well as, social and economic issues faced around the world are, as a result of the same common enemy, which is the extractive logic of capitalism. And so climate finance becomes, and questions around loss and damage become questions not of an act of charity, but what is absolutely due to Africa, as well as, our allies and sisters and brothers across the global south. Anyway, demand number 4 is focused on agriculture and land rights. So expanded access to and control over land and productive resources, and debt-free climate funding for ecological agricultural production and food sovereignty efforts. In Africa, the situation is devastating. About 90% of access to land is denied to women in sub-Saharan Africa, who still have to rely on a male relative in their lives, being a husband, and if they are widowed, the eldest son, if there's no eldest son, an uncle, or any other man who then be able to facilitate their access to land. And we know that we are the nurturers, like women everywhere across the world, of the environment. We are responsible for nurturing, land and therefore life, yet we have such limited access, let alone control over land and productive resources. And the 5th demand is around technology. An immediate end to biopiracy as one, and private sector investments as replacement for public investments, and calling on a real respect for and reverence.
Excuse me, this is the interpreter. My apologies. Could you please slow down a little bit?
Sorry about that. Thank you
so much.
All right. I think I'm just nervous about the time, but I appreciate that. I will try to slow down. So a respect and reverence for, indigenous knowledge, which is currently, continues to be stolen and privatized, for ends that prioritize profit and not a real commitment to advancing knowledge that is going to get us ahead in our fight for climate justice. And of course, we are calling finally on an intersectional approach to this work, because we are insisting that climate justice must be viewed as gender and social justice, right? So speaking then to what the vision, for instance, of the WGC is for feminist climate justice, and it is that acknowledgement that there can be no climate justice without gender and social justice. And in fact, these 3 things are very much interrelated. So if we are going to be effective at, taking advantage of the opportunity of our struggle to really usher in a different future for the world, it is strengthened only by the extent to which we really recognize the struggle for land and life as a core element to the struggle for gender and social justice, a new world for all of us. Right, so one of the primary concerns of the task force is the historic and ongoing exclusion of women, girls, youth, and indigenous peoples at national and global policy dialogues concerned with climate change, right? And so, for example, our speakers, when we launched, kept reiterating the fact that we need to seriously and meaningfully engage with African women and girls and take their present and future needs seriously when formulating adaptation and mitigation strategies across all levels, right? For women, why this is important for women? Of course, we know we are the custodians of land and life, and also we are burdened unevenly with the work of caring, not just for the environment, but also our families. So it does not make sense when decisions about water in a village, for example, exclude women, when it is women who go to the rivers, fetch the water, who go to the forest, get the wood to make the food. And so this burden of care and our role in sustaining families, communities, and the environment overall must be reflected to the extent that we are recognized and meaningfully engaged in global decision-making and policy spaces, with the UNFCCC, for example, being the biggest one. For youth, of course, we want young people are the inheritors of this world, right? And young people are not just the future. Young people are the now. Young people are the present, and this needs to be reflected once again in the ways and the extent to which we meaningfully engage and take seriously the priorities and the leadership of young people who are also at the forefront of fighting climate justice, because they are literally fighting for their future. And so any such centering must begin with this meaningful representation at a national and global level, and should not be just about ticking exercises. Do we have 50% representation? Are we mainstreaming our interventions? But should really be a serious, thorough and far-reaching commitment to doing this work, reflecting and speaking to our lived experiences as African women and girls, to ensure, of course, that climate responses are appropriate and relevant to the context. And so we know that this year's COP, the issue of loss and damages is quite a big one and a very important one for us on the continent. And to this end, we are demanding a dedicated debt-free finance facility over and above sort of what has been put forward to support African countries dealing with losses and damages caused by climate change. This demand includes a call on developed economies to accelerate investments into Africa and put an end to new investments into fossil fuels, right? We cannot continue to be plundered and face these devastating effects, as I mentioned earlier, for this at the altar of development in the North. At present, we know that signatories to the Paris Agreement have pledged but not delivered on the 100 billion in climate financing, which, by the way, falls short of the 250 billion per annum that Africa will need to meet its climate financing need. And like I am emphasizing again, this is not an act of charity. We do not see it as an act of charity. We are not asking nor begging, but we are simply saying, as a matter of equity and justice, the North owes the South a great deal, and they must absolutely just deliver. It will be vital to ensure that private sector funding does not crowd out public sector funding, and that profits are not at the center of these funding obligations. We are in this crisis of our time that we are in now precisely because of a centering of profit and capital over human lives and needs. So this profit-centered approach will further exasperate an already fragile finances of most African states. And so a key component of centering needs over profit is to invest directly into women and girls in the global South. I'm almost at the end, but yeah, so where am I? Great. So for the past 30 years, the obsession, as I mentioned, with profit has led to this, not only the financial ruin of the continent, but also the worst aspects of the climate crisis. And so for us, one of the key ways to reverse this trend is through a gender transformative approach, not just to climate finance, but also at the level of policy, at the level of technology, and of course, support for climate adaptation and mitigation programs with this strong intersectional lens. Now, this should mean that both economic investment and institutional support for renewable energy and climate mitigation and adaptation programs are led by women and young people. Institutional support will also require the expansion of the rights of African women and youth and their integration into policy making and implementation. Now, right now, despite, performing the role of custodians, women on this continent have very few land rights still, with which they can assert control over resources and land. And so a move towards, entrenching women's land rights will play a vital role in both protecting the environment as well as ensuring that women can access the resources to facilitate a just transition. Over 590 million people on the continent do not have access to energy, for example. So energy poverty is a very real problem. Yet when you look at where energy is sourced in developed countries, it is the continent, yet we do not even benefit from the resources that we are so richly that we so richly have. And so a just transition to us is also about thinking quite seriously about how can a just transition also accelerate and support the energy needs of the continent. And we know, like I mentioned, with the forest and the wood, and the water, that it is us as African women and girls that, are mostly affected when we cannot feed our children, when we cannot ensure that our children are able to get an education because they have their lights on at night, and so forth. Now, in conclusion, while these measures that I try to summarize, hopefully, please do, if you want to engage further with these demands, I will put the link in the chat if it's not already there. But really, while these measures are absolutely vital for the continent, simply demanding them will be insufficient to move us forward, right, and shift the needle in the trajectory of climate change. So a core element of the fight for climate and environmental justice will be a sustained and supported activism. I emphasize supported activism of and by women and young people on the continent. That means streamlining gender and youth as a core element to realizing some of these implementation of these urgent global ambitions, which are translated, of course, as several commitments and policy positions. So as the world changes on all fronts, we will have to claim our space and insist on our voice, experiences, and leadership being taken with the seriousness that it has always deserved. Because we have always had the solutions, we know of the ways in which we are continually showing up for our communities in times of crisis. So we know what needs to be done. We know why this matters. What is lacking is the extent to which our knowledge, intuition, experiences, and leadership is taken seriously and meaningfully. And so at COP27 and beyond, this is exactly what African women and girls will be doing in a shared voice and in solidarity with our sisters in the broader majority world and countries. Finally, just to speak a little bit more, and of course we'll get into the Q&A, there can be no vision for a truly a gender transformed and socially transformed world, because there is a potential here in this fight to not only set the world on a different path, but also usher in a different future for how we relate to power, structures and dynamics. But to do that meaningfully and effectively, we understand as the Women and Gender Constituency, and of course as the African Feminist Task Force, right, that climate justice is gender justice and gender justice is social justice. And so any vision of a climate just world, an environmentally safe and secure world, depends on the extent to which we take seriously this intersection. So I'll pause here. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to the Women's Major Group for the invite, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A, and thank you, Andrea, for sharing the link to the demands. Thank you so much all.
Oh, thank you so much, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Zukiswa. Thank you so much for the 6 core theme demand. And also, I got great ideas from your talk. And what I keep now is climate justice is gender justice, and gender justice is social justice. So we really need to continue to strengthen women, girls, youth, and indigenous people to get access to decision-making at all levels. Thank you very much. We're going to proceed with our third speaker, Griselda Alvarado Picado from CoopeSolidar. I think she will be presenting in Spanish. And the question to you, Griselda, is what are the key systemic feminist proposals to address the issues affecting the health and our seas, oceans, and the fisher people, communities, and women that depend on it? Griselda, you have the floor.
Hola a todas, muchas gracias por
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the space that I've been given to be able to share a little bit of the experiences that we have been developing from our workplace. My name is Griselda Alvarado, like you mentioned at the beginning, and I am part of and we are a cooperative that we've been working for 22 years. And we've been working with the conservation of the seas, human rights, women's rights, and indigenous community. We are an organization that we work with a lot of different topics, but in some way they all intersect at some time, at some point, and we are able to work with them. So I would like to share my screen so I can show you the presentation that I prepared for today. And I would like to begin with, I'm sorry, my computer. Yes, I would like to begin with, let's not only focus on the problem that the question is asking, what are the problems that exist about the different issues that we have with the oceans, but I would like to do some emphasis on that it is important to remember that when we talk about feminism, we're not talking only about a group of women in a specific, feminism is based on equality. So we have to see it with a lens. You have to put on your lens of gender and to try to bring everyone that is part of that so we can do the task. So I would like to talk and focus my presentation based on the positive actions and concrete actions that they do with other organizations in the international level to be able to conserve the oceans from a point of view that we are trying to preserve, to open the different possibilities that can go hand in hand with human rights. We have put very clear that women's role has always been to care. And in this spaces specifically, we're not just talking about the family aspect, but we also, the defense women, they dedicate themselves to take care of their lands and their crops and the ocean that are a fountain of nutrition and alimentation in the world. So I am trying to go to the next slide. So hand in hand with what I mentioned before, they are conscious of what they have to do and they do it. They know that their responsibilities is to protect and to restore, which sometimes this is the only way of them to be able to make an income and to secure nutrition for their families. And sometimes it's for whole countries, the activities that a lot of community organizations do when it comes to fishing in a small course. Sometimes the value is not recognized in a way that they should. I would like to also comment, like I mentioned before, when we talk about feminism, it's a collective, and it's something that it should be intersectional and transversal. So something that we have here in Costa Rica. This, as you can see in the small map, is 22 communities that they are in a small scale are fishing, and they go from the Caribe to the Pacific and to do an autonomy organization and having different groups. And like there is a youth network that they've been working for about 10 years, women's network that they have worked for the same, and they have indigenous territories that they take the sustainable resources that the ocean offers. And then we have different tribal communities and Afro-descendant communities that they are also in a process of recuperation so they can reserve their rights in a shared governance here in Costa Rica. There is two examples that we have been participating and we've been working on. And the first one is a product from the Conference of the Oceans that happened in Ipoa, where organizations from Africa and Mesoamerica, they united and they united their voices and they prepare a call to action that has a specific, that guides not just the local and national governance, but it guides their organizations of different organizations that wants to do things right, which is to conserve the sea. That also contributes to the economy and the different communities that live in harmony with this. These are organizations that has these 5 points in a specific, has one that talks about guaranteeing the participation of women and supporting their role in innovation, just as you can see here. It goes more to just empower women, but also to offer a participation in these spaces where they can take, where the decision making is happening, where they are able to present in a way that is concrete, because we know that women that live in these communities to say this is what we need and this is the correct way in which we should be doing things so we can solve these problems that we've been dealing with for so many years. What also brings me to a specific discussion where the conservation, and it also takes me to the community of chums that is in Punta Arena here in Costa Rica, where there is a cooperative of 47 women molusqueras since 2015, and they are taking care of the reefs. And this is their way of living in their culture, and they know when and how is the right way to be able to extract without affecting the reefs and the sea, and to contribute to conservation and diversity. Chomes, from their creation, they've had a very close connection. It's been 6 years where working, where going further to just plant the idea that we need to conserve the oceans. They do a collective work with different skills that has allowed them to raise their voices in the different spaces where there are these different decision-making spaces. To start closing a little bit, a proposal that can be offered at the moment is this case in the community of Chomes. As you are able to see in the photographs, these women and men that are part of the co-op, they have organized themselves to begin a process of recuperation of to continue on this, that because of COVID and the pandemic, it left a little bit on pause, and now they have the opportunity to retake this work. And like I mentioned before, this is a way of them to live and to survive, and they want to preserve it so they can continue to help their communities and their families. And it's an example in an international level that the preservation of the sea and the sea diversity goes hand in hand with people. And the proposals that I have mentioned is on the principles of equality, and we believe that work that is well done, and it goes hand in hand with the respect and the transparency that we can have with organization. And it's very important to say that to protect the seas is fundamental, but we cannot let on the side the women and men and young and youth that they have their way of living, that they make their living with the sea. And it's not just how they survive, but it's part of their culture as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Griselda. Thank you for taking us to Costa Rica experiences. And what I keep and very important is to recognize the effort that young people and women are doing, the effort in conservation, in sea protection, but also to understand that the conservation and the protection of the sea should go hand in hand with the development and access to decision-making of women, young people, and girls who are caring for the ocean and for the sea. So thank you very much for that great lesson learned from Costa Rica. And now this is, I think we still have, yeah, a little bit less than 30 minutes, but yeah, it's like 22 minutes for open discussions. So now the questions are welcome. It's time now for the Secretariat, if you have collected some questions from the chat, please share with us, and the recorders stop, please, recorders should stop their recording now, because now it's just for interaction between the speakers and the participants.